before we jump in, I want to take a moment to properly introduce today's guest. Steve Moss is the founder of Executive Springboard, a firm that works closely with organizations and senior leaders on executive hiring, onboarding, and leadership development. Over the years, Steve has developed companies navigate high stakes leadership transitions and has seen firsthand why so many executive hires struggle and what actually makes them succeed long term. What sets Steve's work apart is the emphasis on culture, coachability, and real world leadership dynamics, not just resumes and technical capability. So, Steve, thank you for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. To start us off, I'd love to go
Per-
back to the beginning. How did you find your way into this work in the first place?
Wow. I'd say that throughout my career I've had two passions. One is building brands. I was a chief marketing officer 4 times, and the other was helping build people's careers. And the first itch was sufficiently scratched on the brand side, so I wanted to focus more on the helping people with their careers. My experience that led to forming Executive Springboard happened in my fourth go-round as a chief marketing officer. I had 3 times before that had been successful, and the fourth time I only lasted a year and a half. And as I was dealing with the post-traumatic stress that comes after a situation like that, went back to consulting and was doing things in brand strategy and marketing best practices. But in the back of my mind, I kept on thinking, what went wrong in this? And I did a lot of homework on why executives fail in new roles. And that led me to develop intellectual property around senior onboarding. What I learned in the process was about half of people fail in the first 18 months. So in the coin flip, that is how people do in these new roles, it wasn't all that unusual for me to find myself in the situation that I did. It wasn't like I had just become incompetent. It's that there are lots of traps that people fall into. And so I wanted to see if I could find a way for learning to be less painful for other people than it was for myself.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So you mentioned that nearly many executive hires don't make it past 18 months. That's a pretty striking reality. So in your experience, is that usually about skill gaps or is it something deeper than that?
Yeah, it's almost never about skill gaps. In my own situation, it was my fourth time as a chief marketing officer. And it wasn't like all of a sudden my skills didn't fit. But what I've learned is that there are maybe 5 broad themes that can trip people up. The first is how coachable is somebody? How will people ask for feedback? How do they accept it once it's given? What do they do with it once it's been received? The second is emotional intelligence, which I think people get hired for IQ, they get fired for EQ in a lot of situations. People also, as you said in the intro, Feroz, people misread the culture a lot. They're not as adept as they may be in getting comfortable with the situation, with the unwritten rules that they may face, and the politics that happen. And politics shouldn't necessarily be a dirty word. It's more about how influencing happens, and getting that right is important. And the fifth piece that I would add is managing change. Almost anybody who comes into a new organization is in a leadership role is seen as a change agent. You're not necessarily hired to do exactly what the guy before you has just done. So getting the pace right is important. Understanding that your change brings other people in an organization grief, and managing that grief can become an important thing. And if you get too far ahead on how you try to implement your change, you might find that nobody's following you.
It makes sense. So what I'm hearing is technical competence isn't the actual issue. It's more cultural fit, emotional intelligence, and how leaders navigate the organizations, right? All right. So one
Yeah,
thing.
and
Yes, please go ahead.
no, I was just going to say exactly that it's how people navigate the situations that they're confronted with. Every situation is going to be different. And the fact of the matter is, the new organization seldom has the tools in place to help you navigate the minefield that you might find yourself in.
Correct. Absolutely. And one thing that really stood out to me when we were having a conversation is the way Executive Springboard approaches hiring and onboarding very differently from traditional executive search, right? So, from your perspective, if you could share with the audience, what does Executive Springboard do differently, and why do you think that that different matters so much at the senior level?
So I'm not going to, at this point, talk about the hiring process itself,
Mm-hmm.
other than to say that a lot of organizations probably put a value on finding somebody quickly. That's one of their metrics of success. And I wish they would think more about, are they able to retain those people that they bring in, rather than worrying about how quick it is that they hire people. What we do, and something that I was very fortunate when I started Executive Springboard, I started thinking, once I had identified some of the key drivers of success in organizations and failure in organizations, I thought about just hanging up my own shingle and becoming an executive coach. I have a lot of respect for people who are executive coaches. I just wasn't sure whether the experience I had as a chief marketing officer would be all that relevant to people outside of a marketing or a sales function. So would a chief financial officer or CIO, would they be in tune to the message that I was trying to provide? And I decided, instead of me doing that coaching myself, what I would do is set up a team of mentors, bring on board a network of people who have sat in executives' chairs, and then match the executive with someone who has the experience that they've had, that they speak the same language, that they've had the same experiences, that they're willing to show their own scars, and in that process make their learning a little bit less painful than mine was. And in doing that, I was fortunate. I didn't think it through at the time, but we now have over 100 mentors at Executive Springboard. So instead of this just being Steve, we've created scale, which is something that's really useful for a lot of organizations, because if you're tasked with managing the talent in your company, very often you have way fewer resources way fewer smaller bandwidth than you can take on yourself. So how do you get above this capacity issue? Well, in creating the model that I did, I developed a lot of breadth among the people who were there. So I'm able to go to try to match with an executive, with perhaps provide 4 or 5 candidates of folks with the experience that may matter to them. And that helps build the credibility right off the bat.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And Steve, you had also mentioned about that you building a proprietary assessment tool. Can you, if that's okay, can you talk on that, please?
Yes. So we have a couple tools that we use. Both are proprietary. In one regard, one of our mentors, Kevin Wilde, who has a coaching practice called the Coachable Leader. Kevin is an expert and a fellow at the University of Minnesota's Carlson School on leadership development and coachability. And he looks at the process of feedback from various ways. Number one, how much do they value the feedback that they're given? Second, how comfortable are they in asking for feedback? What do they do when they're given feedback? How do they receive it? How do they reflect on it? How do they act on it? So those are kind of the components of the feedback. What Kevin had identified was that as people get older and get more senior in their roles, they tend not to ask for feedback as much. They tend to feel like they have the answers themselves. And so you see kind of that skill of being coachable declining for people over time. And that's kind of a natural thing. If that decline becomes too great, there's a correlation with failure in new roles. So if you close yourself down to the ability to take on feedback, you're flying without radar, and that becomes troublesome. So that's one of our assessment tools. The other is broader than just looking at coachability. We've identified 8 different dimensions that tie in with people's success in a corporate environment. We map out their comfort zone on each of those 8 dimensions, and we'll compare it to how they believe the company's needs are on each of those dimensions as well. So if they have, if we're taking a look and saying, well, here's who the company needs me to be, and here's who I am. Are we in sync? Or do we have a disconnect here? If things aren't lined up, if too many things aren't lined up, well, that might be an indication that there's not a good cultural fit. If there are just a few things, those are indications of the areas where you have opportunities to grow, where you can expand what your comfort zone may be, or think of strategies to get people to give you the grace to be able to do things that maybe are not how you're wired. So we'll look at things like how do people manage situations that require change versus maintaining the status quo? What pace do they like to work at? When it comes to relationships, are they looking at casual relationships? Are they comfortable with more formal relationships? And the mapping that we do for any of the dimensions that come up, they're not either or. You can be strong at either end of something. You can move very quickly, and you can also feel very comfortable moving at a slower pace if you have to. The question is, if people don't have something developed on one of those dimensions, and the company's needs are at the end where they're outside their comfort zone, what do they do about that? So we've done this hundreds of times now, and can help plot out the mentoring approach that somebody is going to take based on the executives' fit with their organization in terms of these dimensions.
Makes sense. Makes perfect sense, Steve. So seeing that being coachable is such a make or a break trait, right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially at the executive level, and people tend to think, okay, if I'm getting an executive, they should be able to coach, but they themselves also should be able to be coachable, right? So do you think organizations tend to underestimate how important that trait really is when they are hiring senior leaders?
Yes, very much so. I think companies generally hire somebody expecting that they can do the job. And perhaps the most important thing is how able are they to learn the job. Nobody is fully competent when they step in the role. They don't know the company, they don't know the culture, they don't know the people they have to deal with, etc. And they may find that what worked for them in their last role, well, the laws of physics are different in this new organization than they were where they were before. And so there's no guarantee that somebody who's been successful all the way through their career is going to just knock it out of the ballpark the next time. Companies have their ways of doing things, and I think they are, by and large, unaware of the difficulties that they're placing in front of the executives that are coming in.
It definitely sounds like skills can be taught, but mindset, behavior patterns, emotional intelligence, adaptability, they are much harder to change and to teach, perhaps. Right? So, and you also mentioned about a little bit of onboarding, that not just to look at as a checklist, but as a critical transition period. So, what should organizations actually be paying attention to during especially during the first 90 days that they usually miss?
One of the things that I want to pick on something that you've said here about the first 90 days, because I think this is important.
Mm-hmm.
If there's something that's critical about the first 90 days,
Mm-hmm.
it's that the organization can know in 90 days if they've got a failure or not. I don't know if they can tell if there's going to be a success or not in 90 days. And there's a lot that people can do. What I find, and I think this is really kind of critical for organizations and for those new executives, is that the onboarding process goes a little lot longer than 90 days, right? It's not a sprint. And what we found is our program is 8 months long, because it takes about that long before somebody is fully in a groove. And we go through a lot of trouble to ask stakeholders in the organization what their expectations are of those people. And it's not all about accelerating their success. I'd feel a whole lot better if somebody may take their time a little bit, and by slowing down, they end up speeding things up down the road, and that they're still there 18 months, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years later, because they built the right foundation. And that may be in the relationships that are critical, getting that part right. I'd also say one of the areas that's really important is getting that change management right, because a mistake that executives do And this one, I think, is on the executives more than it's on the company. A company may establish with an executive parameters for a change that this new executive is going to put in place. And the executive feels like they can be a hero if they beat those expectations by a couple of weeks. Well, nobody was asking for it to be established earlier.
Yeah.
But what often happens in that process of going into sprint mode is that you don't build the alignment that you need for the implementation. And so a lot of executives go full speed ahead, head down, running as fast as they can, go around a corner, they're out of breath, they turn around, and no one has followed them. And they're in trouble. So it's one of the things that we have to try to teach people. There are exceptions on this, but one of the things we have to teach people is to fight some of their natural tendencies of accelerating their own pace of change, to make sure they're matching the company so that they get people to come along with them.
Correct.
Our experience has been, there are a few exceptions to that. Private equity organizations where change is a mandate, and ownership might change regularly every 3 or 5 years. The people who are there expect change and will accept it more, and you can make changes faster. Outside of that, most of the things that we see is the change has to be planned and in a deliberate fashion, so you're bringing people along and doing what it takes to get them through those stages of grief to be able to accept the change that's happening and get on board.
Yes, makes total sense, Steve, because somebody at that level, it's not about speed, it's about direction, right? Of course, case to case basis, but it's mostly about direction.
It's about direction. It's about clarity. If you're that senior in the organization, demand the speed from the people who work for you. Once you get them aligned, then there's where the urgency can be.
Yes.
But making sure that you have all the pieces in place to eventually turn on the switch and say, go, now it's time for us to make the changes. That's kind of a critical thing to get in place.
Absolutely. Even in my little experience, I've seen a lot of companies, it's for them more important to know what they shouldn't be doing than what they should be doing, because everybody thinks they should be doing everything. But to get that clarity on what you should not be doing it's so critical as well. And especially when people come in at these level, that's what expected out of them. Hey, get us clarity, give us direction. But as you rightly mentioned, some people have the tendency, I'm here, I want to make my mark as soon as possible, make an amazing impression. So we tend to kind of blindside what we are actually there for. So Steve, it sounds a lot of success or failure comes down to how quickly leaders understand the unwritten rules, right? They're like the stakeholder dynamics and internal politics. Do you see capable leaders getting blindsided by that more often than companies realize?
Absolutely. And it's funny because they could, if people could start speaking the language of culture and ask the questions up front, lots of times they can avoid those issues. I mean, if you were the prime minister of the UK, one of the first things you would not do is have people start driving on the right side of the road, right?
Yes.
There's a rhythm that we all have to dance to.
Yes.
And maybe with the exception of the CEO, who is the person who really can have the greatest influence on change, most of us, and even there's going to be limits, but most of us, we have to dance to the tune that's playing. We have to understand the culture. We have to understand where the power lies. We have to understand how people like to receive communications, not just how it's easy for me to communicate. These are all kinds of the parts that come into play. It's very seldom that it's written down. You don't get an owner's manual for the elements of the culture.
Correct.
But almost everybody else knows it except these people. So they come in, they are like the least politically savvy people, even though they have a lot more stripes on their sleeve than other people. And there's ignorance that they have to get around.
Makes sense, Steve. Like you have to get to their rhythm first. Get them comfortable, and then understand. We are always so often like we want to get to do things, but I think it takes a lot of experience, coaching to sit back, relax, first see what you're dealing with and who are the people that you're dealing with. Makes total sense, and I think that's what when that impressed me, or I mean, I loved when you first spoke. That is how you guys approach the executive hiring a little differently, because everybody is like, okay, how quick can I fill a spot, right? But wait, firing is more expensive than hiring. So you're like,
Exactly.
so, Steve, a lot of companies today are scaling faster, like working in more distributed environments and operating under constant pressure to move quickly. So, from your perspective, what parts of hiring or onboarding take more energy than they.
It's a great question. I think I do see situations where organizations are hiring dozens, hundreds of people
Mhm.
at roughly the same time. I've had conversations recently with heads of HR on areas concerning AI. And
Mhm.
it's funny because for a lot of them, they have a hard time giving up on the human side of the recruiting process. And yet I think there is a place for technology in
Mhm.
how things get screened.
Mhm.
And if you have a way of continuing to keep this as something where there's the personal part where somebody can get a fit on the culture, I think that makes sense. But when your businesses are growing really quickly and you've got new facilities, you're acquiring new businesses, whatever it might be, getting the cultural fit right is a
Mm.
critical piece. Making sure that you've got the skill sets that you need. We haven't been talking about the skill sets. We've been talking a lot about the culture and the politics
Mhm.
and other
Mm.
parts of that. And that may be really important at the most senior level.
Mm.
That's not necessarily where you're going on the scaling. The senior level, you can spend a little bit more time usually to
Yeah.
be able to vet that staff in a pretty personal way. But doing something that allows you to move quickly and recognizes that you have the skills that you need. And I think more and more we're going to situations where it's less about experience and it's more about the skills that
Mm.
particularly in growth organizations, particularly when you're hiring people at middle management.
Yeah. No, makes sense. I think there should be, as we're scaling to meet the demand. mm, I think somewhere we have to make peace with technology and kind of use it to our advantage. And like, hey, here's where I can use, and here's where I shouldn't be using, right? But if we totally shut it off, then we can we'll we may fall back,
Yeah,
right?
it's in the situation that you're suggesting where there's that need to scale.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you do it if you're not willing to have technology be your partner in this.
Correct. Correct,
Yeah,
exactly. So,
yeah.
where do you think, if you can go a little bit, just a little bit more deeper on this, where do things tend to slow down or break down, even when everyone has good intentions? Let's say.
I see this not necessarily. I'm going to use an example, not in hiring, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe in promotions
Mm-hmm.
where this happens. Somebody gets promoted to the C-suite, and there's an awful lot that's written about how they manage former peers who now report to them. That's well-trodden territory. What's not talked about as often is how you interact with a new set of peers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you're coming in now as the equal to other people in the C-suite, some of whom may have been your mentors in the past. They know you, but they have their turfs to protect.
Mm-hmm.
And the relationship changes, and you have to sometimes prove again your competence in a way that's personal for your stakeholders. What are you doing to help them out? And how do
Mm-hmm.
you do that while maintaining the air support for your own people that you need to do? So it can be a complicated thing in joining that C-suite. It's obvious to me when that happens from internally. I think some of the same dimensions happen externally. People feel like they have to prove themselves, and they have to be careful not to prove themselves as in I'm the smartest guy in the room, because that doesn't go over too well.
Correct. Correct.
You know, when people continue to try to prove what's already been proven because they got hired, they're making a mistake. You know, once they're in, they don't have to continue to try to make the sale. Now what they have to do is figure out how they can learn, and at the same time they're learning in a reciprocal way, be able to add value to their colleagues.
It makes total sense, Steve. That reminds me. There's one person whom I told that whom I know personally that hey, I love to be in your leadership. And what stood out for me was from him was I had read this in the book by Robin Sharma. It was CEOs Eat Last. I think that was the book, and that he had very beautifully mentioned that leaders are somebody who makes others leaders. And I think once somebody gets into this role, and he had also mentioned very beautifully, people either want to lead or either want to follow. But so when they see somebody at their level, so they will see, are you a threat, or are you here to grow along with me? Are you going to throw me under the bus? Right? That makes so much sense, right? Like once you're at that level, hey, now we are not competing, let's align together, understand the why of the organization, and go towards a common goal.
And at the same time, though, people are people. So rivalries don't necessarily go away. And trying to figure out how to do this in a healthy way, showing the respect and acting with humility, particularly in a new role when you don't have all the answers, becomes a kind of important thing. If I can, Feroz, I have something else that I thought of that we run into all the time. It's such a common situation that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention. We refer to this as we're in pissed off. So many times in an organization, things are not done well in succession plan. If I'm in the C-suite and I have somebody who works for me who I think should be my successor, I shouldn't be, and I'm trying to get them ready for that role. There are no guarantees. And if I communicate in ways that maybe suggest that, hey, when I leave, this is going to be yours, that can be a mistake. Because I may not be the person who gets to decide who my replacement, my successor is going to be. And so now the new person comes in, and it's not the one that I've been grooming for that spot. And they're like, well, what makes Feroz so great that he got this position and I didn't? Right? And it happens all the time. I mean, the work that we do with onboarding senior leaders, I'd say 50% of them have somebody on their team who thought they should get the role. And in the early mentoring sessions, it's probably about 30% of the time that gets spent on how to manage these people. Because they deserve the respect, they have institutional knowledge, but they're also in a position that if you're not careful, they can be a big disruptive force within the rest of your team. And making sure that they respect you in your role as the leader of this organization is critical. And then maybe giving them something that they can feel that they own, where the new boss isn't looking over their shoulder all the time, becomes a pretty important piece as well.
It makes sense. There's so much that we as humans have to learn. People about our own kind. So many layers.
Or have to relearn, right? I mean, it's not something that seldom do we come up with something that's like, oh, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
It's all these things that we forget.
Yes.
And we find ourselves getting into some trouble with that.
Absolutely. Unlearning, relearning is so important than learning. Makes sense. Yes. So last question, Steve. So for leaders who are either hiring executives or stepping into senior roles themselves, what's one thing you wish they took more seriously?
How hard this whole process is, right? That if you're hiring somebody from the outside, 50%, there's a 50% failure rate. Now, a company might say, well, okay, so there's 50% who succeed. It must be on them. No, I don't think it is. I think we're just not aware of the obstacles that we put in the way of people's success. And it's not just the obstacles, it's the fact that how much they need the help. And whether it's an organization like mine, whether it's an executive coach, whether it's a peer circle, people have to the organization needs to resource this the new person's journey into a successful tenure. And if you leave it to their own resources, it's not such a great picture. I mean, I'll give this statistic on my own business, not because it's a selling point, but just because it's what happens when somebody is getting the attention. So we track how many of our executives that we work with are still in a role 18 months later. And we're at about 91% as opposed to 50%. And again, it's from that, whether it's us or somebody else, that executive realizes the organization has made an investment in them. There's been a focus. There's been a way of looking at things, whether it's a coach, whether it's a peer circle, mastermind, whatever it might be, that lets them do things, feel like they have psychological safety to be open about their doubts in the role that they have, and have somebody who can support, who can guide, and can be an irritant at times to prod them into things, and somebody who can hold them accountable. All those things are kind of important, I think, in the process of making that, of going from 50% failure to something that's less than 10%. It can be done.
It makes sense. Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective today. And there's a lot of noise around hiring and leadership, but grounded experience, insights like this are rare. And I thank you again for being a part of this conversation. And Steve, anybody who's listening and are curious how they can get in touch with you, what is the best method that I can share with our audience?
Well, thank you, Feroz. First of all, it's been great being with you. Really appreciate it, and wonderful questions and a great discussion. Delighted to have been part of this. Anybody who wants to reach us can go to info@execspringboard.com. That's EXEC springboard.com. And that would be, an email that will get to immediately. You can visit the execspringboard.com website and find a lot of information there. We're adding information daily. I was reviewing about 4 new blogs today, so there's a lot of good stuff there, a lot of good resources for people to use.
Sure, I will make sure that I put all those details along with the video as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve.